It's just starting now. It just takes a second.
Okay, thank you. So we've got we've got one slide on the screen. Chicken. So could we just have an open screen, please? Yeah, that's it. Thank you. Okay, Bernadette and Sarah, if you'd like to continue. Thank you.
Thank you. So here on this slide, we're really introducing the Climate Adaptation Te Tai Tokiro group. So we started working together in July 2018. It's a working group of staff from the 4 local councils in Tai Tokiro and our iwi and hapu representatives who joined us in 2020. We're really working to ensure a consistent approach to climate change adaptation across Northland, and we have some terms of reference. We started to prepare some key messages that were going to go out into a public forum, and in the process of doing that, it was pointed out that we really need the sign-off of and guidance of governance level representatives. So we went through the process of establishing a joint climate change adaptation committee. So that committee consists of 1 elected member from each respective council and 1 iwi or hapu representative from each council boundary. So it's 8 people in total. The chair is Councillor Amy McDonald from Northern Regional Council, and the deputy chair is Deloraine Armstrong. Wow. The other 2 the other Whangarei District Council reps are Councillor Anna Murphy, who alongside Deloraine are our primary representatives, and Councillor Greg Innes and Rosie Wellington through Te Huinga are our secondary representatives. Next slide, please. Thank you. So why are we doing a regional strategy? Well, it's in the terms of reference for CAT to commit us to responsibilities around data collation and modelling, strategic planning and engagement, and turning all of our work into a strategy. Our councils and our tangata whenua partners are fairly limited in our resources. So with this strategy, we're essentially pulling all of our resources, the things that we're good at, and we're working to our strengths. This has been quite effective so far. We have managed to get quite a bit started, which is really efficient in terms of our resources. So you'll all be quite familiar with the Te Ao Māori decision-making framework that we're seeking to be co-designed with tangata whenua. That mahi drops out of our climate adaptation work, and it's being led by Whangarei District Council, but will be shared with all 4 councils. So WDC is leading that. Far North District Council are leading the development of a climate assessment policy for the region, and that relates to some of our priority actions that we'll talk about later. NRC have led the hazard mapping and GIS analysis to help us understand the different risks to our coastal communities. And Kārearea District Council will be going first on our community engagement, which will be an awesome opportunity, particularly for Whangarei District Council, to learn from, because we'll be kicking off engagement about 6 months after everybody else. And we've pulled together a cool communications team across the region, which is something that the 4 councils have never done before. It's also an opportunity for us to work together for the good of Tai Tokiro as a whole, and we're really lifting performance and the quality of the work for all of Northland, and at the same time the individual councils retain decision-making autonomy. We have had really good feedback from our colleagues across the country, and that's sort of quite, I guess, gives us a bit of confidence to continue with the mahi that we're doing. Although we're sort of learning as we go. The strategy also gives us the opportunity to engage with the government as a region, and so we've made some collective submissions on to the Climate Change Commission, and we have sought funding from the Deep South National Science Challenge resourcing. Our colleague who used to lead us is now actually sitting within the Climate Change Commission, so rather than losing our chairperson of our CAT group, we have gained a colleague within the Climate Change Commission and all of their knowledge and resources, hopefully. Next slide, please. Awesome. So we had as I mentioned, we had our first meeting in mid-2018. We needed to move through the process of having the terms of reference agreed to by the CEs. Then we, Whangarei District Council went to Te Huinga in November 2019 to seek that Te Huinga nominate hapu representatives to work with us on our climate change mahi. Deloraine and Rosie were put forward, and they continue to work with us till now and hopefully forever. Around that time it was raised that we needed that governance oversight, as I talked about. So we've got our joint committee of 50-50 elected member and tangata whenua representatives. That took some time to get off the ground, to sort of go through all the councils and through the tangata whenua forum. So it wasn't really till April this year that the committee had its first proper meeting. We had a workshop with the committee on our draft strategy that we're presenting on today in early August. Feedback from the joint committee informed the revisions that we've made to the draft, and then on the 30th of August we sought formal endorsement from that joint committee to come back to yourselves and back to full councils and really to workshop the draft and get your thoughts on it. We had our first workshop with our elected members a couple of weeks back, and the CAT group presented to TTMAC last week, which some of you were present at. And then we've got our workshop today with yourselves, and then again Te Huinga in later October. It's going to take a few weeks to bring the content together for the 30th of November meeting of the Joint Committee. But at that meeting, we're hoping to share the feedback received and then demonstrate how that feedback has been reflected in the strategy. Hopefully, we will have endorsement from the Joint Committee to then come back again to yourselves and to full council to seek adoption. So we're aiming for early 2022 for adoption. If you're interested in what the wording of the joint, the wording for the resolution from the Joint Committee is, it's on the next slide. It's also in your agenda item. Next slide, please. And that's that the Joint Committee endorses the draft to be further developed by staff through workshops with individual councils and our tangata whenua representatives, with the final version of the strategy being committed to the Joint Committee for endorsement at the 30th of November Joint Committee. Next slide, please. Cool. Okay, so the strategy is made up of 4 documents, and I'm going to show them to you. This one is the strategy, and it's, well, the main part of it really, and it contains the foundational content and 4 parts, which cover the executive summary and foundations, which look at our scope, our vision, mission statement, principles, and the objectives. Part 1 covers the background and context. Part 2 covers key issues, responses, and opportunities. Part 3 is our approach to enabling effective adaptation, and Part 4 acknowledges that it's an evolving strategy. Then we have our technical report, which is this one. Can you see that? With lots of diagrams. And this technical report is a climate risk overview. It looks at the different perspectives of climate risk, managing these risks, and climate impact diagrams. Then we have the priority actions, which is this document. And it covers 46 priority actions focused on growing relationships, improving knowledge and understanding, reducing risk and vulnerability, and then we've got the 4th one. Yeah, building capacity. And then we have our snapshot, which is a summary of all of this information into a 20-page version, which looks like this is sort of one of the first ones. Cool. So we're going to walk you through that sort of step by step now. Next slide, please. Right.
Okay, so the strategy is based on 3 foundations: the vision, the mission statement, and objectives. So the vision that the CAT group came up with is that the people and the environment of Te Tai Tokerau thrive and are resilient in a changing climate. Our mission statement Across Te Tai Tokoro, we work together with iwi hapi partners and stakeholders to proactively understand for, plan for, and respond to the impacts and opportunities of climate change. And our objectives are improving and broadening our understanding of the risks, especially in relation to local government activities, clarifying our adaptation needs and responsibilities, identifying our opportunities, and recommending priority actions for local government. Next slide, please. So the foundations that we've built the strategy on are also underlain by 10 different principles, and I won't go through them there, but in detail, but Te Tiriti o Waitangi is at the top, working together through whanangatanga, using our knowledge, so Western science alongside our mataranga to help understand our climate change. Any of our work needs to be considered, so it's research-led, evidence-based, values-driven policy and decision-making. We use the past to help us plan for the future. What we're doing is trying to be transformative. So the things that are going to happen to us, we need to take advantage of opportunities to build a better future. So that sometimes can be quite different to what we're working in currently, but it needs to, sometimes it needs to be that visionary. There's an element of transition. So there's a lot of transition risks, especially around some of the industry, etc., that we have in Northland and Tai Tokoro. So that's quite a big founding principle. We need to be equitable. We ensure no one is left behind through fair and TICA processes. Our work needs to be holistic and integrated. So those principles have really built what the strategy is built from, and what a lot of the what we're working to. So the climate action plan that we're working through for whangarei also, is that we're trying to align with these principles. So the work that we will be doing at the more local level will also be based on these principles. Next slide. Through the chair, so we had another point here of a check-in. So is there any aspects of this content that you would like clarification on? Does this reflect the vision of Te Kārearea and the mission? And just open that first part of the strategy up for discussion.
Well, thank you for that. And questions, I'll probably lead off with a question. Yeah, this is a massive amount of work, and through presentations, you're going to have to go over and over the same ground a lot. And in the past, some of the dealings I've had it with some really good scope and, I just lost everyone. The scope and practicalities of getting things through council, simplicity is quite good at times. And if you had something that's like something like climbing up a 12-rung ladder, if you go 1, 2, 3 steps and then stabilise and then go again, but those 3 steps will be signed off by council, so you don't have to go back and revisit it. And I think that actually gets your momentum going a lot faster, and you've got security that council's already made some decisions, and that leads you into the next tranche of work, probably the next 3 steps, and we can get council to sign that off again, because otherwise there's an opportunity for councillors or residents to go back and ask for a presentation all the time on work you've done months ago. So it's just something for you to think about. And from someone who's been on council for a while, I know simplicity is the way to do a lot of this work, and to take the people with you, but at the same time save you a lot of work so you don't have to go and revisit all the time. That's my comment on it. So open for discussion. Any comments? Further comments? Further comments, anyone? I can't see the screen at the moment. I'm kind of blocked out. Delaraine, please.
Yeah, look, Phil, I just wanted to, in the gap of waiting for others to think about their questions, is just take the opportunity to say a great big thank you. You're right, it's really moving at pace, this program. Yeah. It's got lots of moving parts to it, but in watching the progress and development that the Joint Council's CAT team have worked on, it's just been amazing to witness and be a part of, and gives hope for real promise in the future and how councils can work together with hapu and with communities to be able to find solutions for us in this challenging future of climate change. So I just want to say thank you to both Bernadette and Sarah who are presenting here today, but to all the team, and particularly acknowledge Matt who's moved on but not too far from us, so still connected with us. Thank you.
Good one, thank you, Delroy. Okay, well, I can't see any hands, so I can't see the screen with everyone's faces on it. So I'll have to I'll have to apologise if I miss anyone. So we'll go back to the presentation and whip through the presentation now and finish it off, please.
Kia ora, Phil. I'd just like to make a comment.
Yeah. Okay,
it's
go ahead.
Aorangi.
Yeah.
I noticed in reading through the paperwork that there's room for a whakatauki, and I think we could work on that. Just one that sprung to mind in talking about looking at the presentation, ki mua ki muri, ko te amorangi ki mua, ko te hāpai o ki muri, reflecting on how we look back at the past and we move forward into the future, and how everybody contributing to the kaupapa, whether it's in the forefront or in the background, that we're all included in that mahi. So that's just a suggestion, doesn't need to stand forever, but it's just a suggestion for today anyway. It popped into my mind.
Okay, thank you.
Beautiful presentation too, excellent.
Okay, let's go back and finish this presentation off now, please. Thank you.
Okay, next slide, please, Nicolene.
Sorry, somebody else is taking control of the presentation.
I'm gone.
I'll just reshare it. Come on back. Okay. It's just loading.
Thank you. We're on slide 19. Oh, thank you. This is me. All right, so in terms of the strategy part 1, background and context, the section provides a bit of a context of where we're at as a region. 3 areas that we focus on include the need for adaptation. So here we're talking about adaptation as being a key part of our long-term global response to climate change to protect people, livelihoods and ecosystems. We acknowledge that that adaptation responds to the impacts of climate change, but it certainly does not replace the need for urgent greenhouse gas emissions reductions. We talk about how climate change adaptation is understood and communicated, and here we're acknowledging that the impacts and implications of climate change are very complex, and there are different knowledge bases and approaches. We acknowledge the local government and central government perspectives, being that human-induced climate change is really reflective, is causing the long-term shifts in temperature and weather patterns, driven mainly by greenhouse gas emissions. I talked about that earlier, so what I'll instead talk about is the approach of the National Climate Change Risk Assessment, which splits up the impacts of climate change into all these different domains. So it looks at the natural environment, the built environment, the human environment, economy and governance. But when we did our risk assessment workshops, you can see these highly complex diagrams which show how interconnected all of the impacts of climate change on the different domains actually are, which, like how they're explained in text, don't really really reflect that interconnectivity. It sort of more aligns more closely with, I guess, the Te Ao Māori perspectives on interconnectedness. So we're also acknowledging a Te Ao Māori perspective on relationships with the environment. And just to go back to, sorry, the National Climate Change Risk Assessment, they split it up into domains, but they also acknowledged in that approach that that didn't work for Te Ao Māori, and that a very specific risk assessment that sort of looks at mātauranga Māori, tikanga Māori, and how we communicate and connect to the environment was actually needed. So in part one of the strategy, as I said, we acknowledge Te Ao Māori perspectives on the taiao, and we talk about whanaungatanga. We do our best to try and explain it, and we've actually referred to some of the content from the Ko Aotearoa Tēnei, the Y262 report, and how they explain whanaungatanga. So I'd appreciate your feedback on whether or not you'd agree with that, but it talks about how the genealogical relationships between people and the natural resources, and even between related bodies of knowledge work. And in this section, we talk about how Māori relationships with the cultural landscape are explained through whakapapa, and that pūrākau and mātauranga passed down through generations actually describe the relationships with and between ngā atua, which help to understand what practices need to be followed to te ake the environment, to understand why certain effects and changes occur, and also to identify the responses needed to address those impacts or to adapt to the effects. We also talk about how pūrākau remind us that our tupuna face similar situations. We referred to the existing and forthcoming legislation that we're working under, and Sarah talked to that earlier, and so I won't go into it any further, but I'll just mention that there is also a summarised version in the snapshot diagram document here. Okay, next slide, please. Is there any aspects on this content that you'd like clarification on? We also have these things called call-out boxes, where we're trying to move away from a really text-heavy document, and any examples that we can provide to add flavour or, I guess, content that makes it easier to relate to in the region. If you've got any ideas on content that could be put into a call-out box, that would be really cool. Aorangi.
Kia ora, everybody. Kia ora, Bernadette. Excellent report. Could we please have a link to that document called Aotearoa Tēnei that you spoke of? Cool, thank you.
I'll circulate that after the meeting. Any other questions, or can we move on?
Let's move on, please. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Awesome. So in part two, we talk about key adaptation issues, responses and opportunities. This is where we go into greater detail addressing three questions, being what are the current issues, what are the current responses, and what are our adaptation opportunities. So under governance and management, we talk about council's internal and external roles and responsibilities, including our relationships with tangata whenua partners and also key stakeholders. We talk about the organisation's functionality and effectiveness in meeting legislative and treaty and te tiriti obligations. We talk about the impacts on Māori and the different types of knowledge and insights about the impacts of climate change on Māori from hapu and iwi partners and tangata whenua perspectives. There's lots of references to iwi management plans and hapu environmental management plans in this document, and I'd appreciate it if whānau reviewed them to make sure that I've reflected your kōrero as you had intended in your documents. Then we've got under coastal communities, we talk about the impacts, climate impacts and implications for Northland's coastal communities. Next slide, please.
Okay, so the next set of issues that we looked at, we've grouped around water availability. So what is the quantity and quality for water supply for Northland? So what are the issues and challenges around that? Our natural hazards environment, so it goes through our coastal, river and land hazards and the implications and impacts of those. The impact on the ecosystems and biosecurity. So this is it's a growing area. It's probably one of the one we haven't got as much information in the document as we would need, but it's something that we're going to be working on quite a bit and more in the future. And the public infrastructure. So how does the built assets that we currently have and what are our plans around how do we manage forward for built assets and what is expected from local government provision? And are there other natural assets that we can actually work towards? So it's not just about protection, it is about adapting and identifying the major risks around the public infrastructure. So this doesn't just cover the roads and pipes, it is also our parks and our community facilities. It also covers parts of the drainage schemes and the coastal management structures as well. Next slide. So that was a bit of a fast part, but a lot of this information is covered quite well in the snapshot document. So that's a good place to start when you're looking at each of those individual areas. But is there any aspects of this content you'd like to talk through, and how could we better reflect the issues that are applicable to Whangarei and Te Kārearea?
Anyone got any comment? Yeah. Arangi.
Kia ora everyone. I'd like to know, I've just got a question. How do we adapt to saline intrusion into aquifers?
Pretty hard.
It's something that we are very aware that we need to do more information on. So we need to, as part of the, I think it is one of the actions to do more research around those coastal aquifers and to identify the impacts that they will have. So these are the kinds of high level actions that are coming out of the strategy, and then we'll need to work that down into sort of how would that be managed on a on an aquifer by aquifer basis.
Thank you.
I suppose the other thing too will be the ongoing job of being aware of the emerging reforms that are taking place now and how they're integrated into the mahi that we do now, because this is somewhat ahead of some of that work that will follow it, and it will definitely impact on the work that's being done now by the CAT team. So just, I guess, ensuring that we have a strategy for that. Kia ora.
Yes. Any more questions? No. Okay. Continue, Bernadette, please.
Next slide, please. Awesome. Okay, so we're going to go through the actions now, which I'll remind you relate to these action tables. I'd just like to note that the actions some of them will be at a regional level, so collectively taking place across all of the region. Some of them will sit with Northern Regional Council, and some of them will sit at a district council level or being collaborative. Not all of them are for Whangarei District Council. One of the jobs that Sarah and I have to do is to work with our colleague Hamish to incorporate the collaborative and Whangarei district or district level actions into our climate action plan that Sarah mentioned earlier on in the presentation. So I'll just give you a little bit of an overview of the priority actions. So we've got under actions focused around growing our relationships. So they intend to be around sort of partnering with tangata whenua at all stages of adaptation planning, facilitating collaborative planning with local communities, communicating with communities about adaptation information and processes and listening to their feedback, working across our departments within council to integrate climate change priorities, ensure alignment between activity areas. This was a key issue that came up at TTMAC last week. To also continue to coordinate adaptation planning programs between councils and sharing our resources, working together at different levels of government and sectors, and also to advocate and engage with central government agencies on adaptation funding, legislation, policy and support. Next slide, please. We've got actions around improving knowledge and understanding. So that's here one of, like you asked, Aorangi, what are we going to do with coastal aquifers and saline intrusion? We have sort of a lot of work in these types of areas that we need to build our understanding on. So here we need to identify key knowledge gaps and develop targeted investigations and research. Expand our existing knowledge base through research, assessments, investigations, work with our iwi and hapu to be guided by mātauranga where they feel it's appropriate for local government to do that, and how we can empower them to do that in their own realms. Work with communities to understand risks and the range of potential solutions that are available to us. Monitor and evaluate and report on climate risks, community vulnerability and environmental indicators, and also to develop research partners with institutes and collaborate on externally funded research. That's one that we've sort of got underway, and we've got a little bit of money to undertake pre-engagement across Northland to understand what the needs are for our hapu and iwi in terms of them undertaking their own climate change risk assessments and adaptation. Next slide, please. Cool. We've got actions around reducing risk and vulnerability. So to preemptively plan adaptation responses at the local scale, working with Māori communities, infrastructure providers, government agencies and stakeholders using appropriate engagement processes and decision-making tools. Got actions around developing rules and policies that reduce risk and enable appropriate and flexible adaptation responses. Planning for and investing in long-term risk management infrastructure and solutions for a wide range of climate risks that we'll be experiencing, as well as adopting appropriate nature-based responses and interim measures. Next slide, please. Oh, and this is a really big one. So in terms of building capacity here, we want to we've got actions around demonstrating leadership through effective and collaborative governance, building internal staff capacity and resources, both through specialist teams as well as across and between our organisations, develop consistent climate change policy between councils, and also to integrate climate change objectives across council policies, strategies and processes. And I mentioned at the beginning that FNDC are leading some of this work for us all. Actions around providing sufficient funding for adaptation activities, including investigations, planning engagement, and implementation where appropriate, and to identify collaborative and external funding opportunities. Next slide, please. Any questions on that huge number of actions? Got a memo.
No, I can't see any.
Oh, thanks, Phil. Sorry, I just had a general, can I firstly acknowledge the tremendous amount of work that is ongoing in this area. It's phenomenal. Back on slide 24, it was talking about relationships, and I just wondered what involvement the wider committee have with sort of agricultural and horticultural, sort of those primary producer sector, and what inputs they have. I'd be really interested to hear that. Thanks.
At the moment, we haven't actually connected in with them yet. One of the challenges that we have as a group faced is understanding or knowing when we should connect outwards. And this was a big issue for us in bringing in our hapu and iwi, because they had certainly told us that we did that too late. And that we'd already sort of made quite a few steps forward before we connected with them to invite them in on the journey. And for us, we'd sort of thought, oh, well, we're not ready to talk to others yet. But I think if you've got any guidance on how to do that, who to connect with, and if you think it's a good time for us to be going out to them now, we'd appreciate that.
Thanks, Benny. I just think the strategy impacts absolutely everybody, and so as you've highlighted, getting engagement with that hapu relationship is critical. But I do think that because it does impact on every single person who lives in this beautiful country, that engagement, and I'm sure that others will have networks that they can guide you to tap into.
We are getting a report from NIWA that is an accompany report to the one that they did for the region in 2018. And we've talked to their chief scientist, and he asked us to identify some particular sectors that we would like the impacts to be sort of turning their minds to or expressed as examples to those particular sectors. And we've definitely identified horticulture and agriculture.
Okay, Arangi, did you want to comment here? I saw your hand go.
Yes, I'm just recalling a Ministry for the Environment series of workshops we attended, public consultation hui actually. It might have been 2 or 3 years ago, when the farming and the agriculture sector were quite actively involved. We had Māori engagement at Pihiauri and other marae, and I recall going to Tikipunga High around the agriculture and farming sector engagement, and it was a massive level of engagement. The hall was packed, and so there must be a way that we can connect. I guess the Ministry for the Environment, they managed that whirlwind consultation. And it was interesting to have Māori in the room with the farmers. It was a whole different environment when we were in the hui with hapu, and then in the hui with farmers and agriculture people. So I think we've got to have some more collaboration there. It is about timing too. So we might need to look at putting that into the strategy to make sure we include that connecting of the sectors and relationships.
I think that sounds like perhaps it was through the He Waka Eke Noa climate change work, which is focused on emissions reductions. So just as some background information, Hamish, myself and Tony Horton had connected with some of the farmers around Ruakaka by way of Councillor Cooper and Councillor Hulse and Councillor Deeming about 12 months ago. So we did that on a climate action plan, which covers a little bit of adaptation, but not this specific project.
Okay, Councillor Cooper would like to speak now.
Oh, well, thank you. Firstly, Sarah and Bernadette, for a great presentation again. You've covered it off just then, Bernadette, thank you. And I agree with what Her Worship the Mayor said. But I think you're onto it anyway, so I'm happy to leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, just finish off the next slide too, and that will open up further discussion, Bernadette.
Oh, Sarah, are you there?
Sorry, unmute myself helps.
Yeah.
So part 4 of the document is the evolving strategy. So we identified that the strategy needed to be not necessarily a living document, but one that we could flexibly and responsively change our actions and some of the technical information in response to information and the changes in legislation and environments that Deloraine also mentioned there. So reviews can be grouped into 3 categories. So we can add new technical reports or updates to existing reports that support the strategy. There can be minor operational and updates to the strategy or the priority actions within the context of the actions we have there. And then the major is the substantive review, which we're sort of looking at a 3-yearly review interval period at this point, which would make major strategy changes or the priority actions, which could reflect some of the big changes that might come out of central government or international direction. One of the reasons we did that was that kind of trying to be responsive so that we could look at ways of ensuring that the document was able to be live and continue to grow with us rather than it just sitting on a shelf and not being used, as well as the time taken to get it through the processes to get it updated through the joint committee and then back down to each of the district councils, etc. So that's the sort of the way we've been thinking about the strategy, and so that's also built into part 4 of that, about how we will manage reviews and the changes. Next slide. I think that. Should we just carry on to the final where to from here? Yeah.
Yes, please. Yeah.
No, okay, off you go. So Bernadette, do you want to finish off?
Yeah.
You're on
Oh,
mute.
sorry. Thank you. I forgot to unmute myself too. Okay, so where to from here? We're in October, as you can see, and workshopping the draft with yourselves. Then we're collating the feedback from all of the councils and the tangata whenua forums, which actually we start that process tomorrow. Excuse me. And we are pulling together the common and agreed content to form the regional strategy from all of the feedback. Where we've got a clear agreement, we'll just sort of as a staff group identify that feedback, identify the agreement, and propose to incorporate it. But it's possible that there will be conflicts across the region, and so we'll need to identify where those conflicts are and escalate it to the joint committee for some decision making on that. On the 30th of November, the joint committee will discuss the proposed final version of the strategy, and hopefully they will endorse it for it to come back to each individual council for adoption. And as we mentioned, we're thinking around sort of February, March 2022, we will be coming back to you. In the meantime, we'll be revising and aligning the content in the Climate Action Plan, which is another piece of work we've talked about. We'll share the feedback that's been received through nearly 18 months of engagement on that work and the proposed changes with our elected members and yourselves. So you'll receive another presentation from us on the Climate Action Plan. Probably not such a long presentation though. And then, yeah, I mentioned the strategy for the region hopefully being adopted in March 2022. And then shortly after that, we'll be seeking adoption of the Climate Action Plan. Yeah, so that's us. Thank you for your time today.
Yes, it's just lucky we have plenty of time at the end there, Bernadette, to accommodate such a long presentation. But thank you, Sarah and Bernadette. You're very passionate in your work, so that's great. So just a comment I'd like to make, just to progress this in bulk lots. You're working on strategies and that with other councils and that, but if you've got a priority you want us to make a decision on, could you just forward that forward? You know, it could be mid-meeting, could be whenever you feel up to it, because, you know, this amount of work is massive. And if you can tick some work off, you know, week by week, it'll make it so much easier for everyone. So if you don't be afraid to bellow out and let us know. Thank you. Okay, comments, please, around the room. No, very good. I think Councillor Innes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to acknowledge the presentation by Bernadette and Sarah. It's incredibly comprehensive, and just going back and reflecting on it, I think the ownership that's been established at all levels is so important, and it's something that going forward, it's really more than a document in many ways. It's just having that ownership and also picking up on Deloraine's point about integrating with the reforms that are taking place. But I feel the ownership that you're establishing will provide a very good platform for the integration. And I see with it evolving as an evolving strategy, that 3-year review is something that will fit in, I think, with our long-term planning approach. So well done, most enjoyable. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Innes. Your Worship, Mayor.
Thank you. And again, just commending the work that's gone into it. At the end of the document, it talks about some of the triggers for the plan reviews, and I note that the Climate Change Adaptation Act, the Natural and Built Environments Act, and the Spatial Planning Act, that they'll be coming forward. It just feels like we are going to be so far ahead of what's coming with that legislation and being prepared for it. It's one of the few times I think probably that we'll be able to say, yep, we're onto that. It'll be interesting to watch what is included into that legislation under the RMA reforms. So again, it's just really pleasing to see that we've triggered this major body of work ahead of that, those changes coming. Thank you, team.
Yes, very good point. Okay, any further comments? Okay, so to enable us to receive all this, we better go back to the recommendation so we could actually receive this information. So there's a recommendation on page 67. It reads that the Kārearea Strategic Partnership Standing Committee, 1, receives the report, 2, provides guidance and feedback on the draft strategy and documentation to staff. So I think we've done that quite well today. And someone like to move that recommendation, please?
Kia ora.
Amy and Jared Pittman moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Just before I put the motion, why we're allowed extra time on this is just such a huge amount of work, and I think we're getting some really good buy-in in this whole committee, the way we're working together. And it's really good that people can talk quite openly on the subject, and we're making really good progress, and well led, Sarah and Bernadette. So, okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Okay. Against? Right, motion carried. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our open agenda, and thank all the staff members who have helped us out through this morning's meeting. We've got one item in confidential, but I think before everyone leaves, I think we'll break a bit of tradition and ask Rob to actually close this meeting, because we've got everyone connected now, and we might lose people when you go into confidential. So Rob, could you just close the meeting, please?
Kia ora, Councillor. Me no tātou. Unuhia ki te uru tapunui, kia watia, kia mama tinako, te tinana, te wairua I te ara takata, koe rare rongo, whakaeria aki ki runga, kia tina hui e dai ki e. Kia ora, everyone.
Kia ora koutou.
Thank you, Rob. So at this stage, we need a move to go into confidential. We've got one item to meet just with committee members. So Captain Benny, Councillor Innes, all in favour of raise your hand, please. Okay, carried. Okay, thanks very much for everyone who's joined us this morning. So we're now going to confidential. We'll just have a break, and Nicolene will let us know when the recording has been disestablished.